All right. So I think we'll get going. This is David Novak from Profit. Great to have our panelists here and all those attending and those that are going to be joining us later and listening and reviewing some of this amazing content. Just by way of introduction, Profit has been around for 30 years. We're a brand consultancy, been doing a lot of work with some big brands for a long time. And over the last few decades, we started to really transition ourselves into becoming a growth consultancy, one that really works with our clients, not just about their brand position, but also how do they think about growth and growing with their customer base and driving at customer acquisition strategies, new product launches, a whole host of other areas. And as part of that evolution, we started thinking in a part of Profit around this linkage between brand activities and demand activities for modern organizations. And we thought it was really interesting to start to take a look at that space and dig a little bit deeper. So we're going to go into a little bit about what our report uncovered. We've got some expert panelists with us. They're going to dive deep into the topics. They were also contributors to some of the initial research and thinking. So let's start moving into the rest of the story. But we wanted to take a second to introduce the folks that we have with us on the journey. So I'll start just by way of introduction. I'm David Novak. I co-lead our marketing and sales platform with Mat Zucker, who's going to be presenting along with me today. I think we were talking about whether we were brand oriented or demand oriented by practice. I think I can say pretty confidently I've been demand oriented, and I'm spying on all the great brand work that we do at Profit, so I can become a little bit more expert in that space over the last few years. Matt.
And hi, I'm Mat Zucker. I co-lead Profit's marketing and sales practice with David. Half my career was in brand advertising. I started as a copywriter. I became a creative director. I worked in TV and brand. Absolutely loved brand marketing. The second half of my career, I started to focus also as a creative and later as a strategist in direct marketing, in product marketing, performance marketing, and the connective tissues. So I think I'm team both. I think I'm team brand and team demand. I think depending on the circumstance, I switch conversations and I switch my priorities, but I do think things like creativity kind of connect them, things like strategy. So I'm on both sides of the team. Theresa, do you want to go next?
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Terrific. Thanks for having me here today. I spent the last 8 years at TD in Canada, where I was the Global Chief Marketing Officer. And then I'm now the head of global marketing for T.Rowe Price. Just a terrific firm doing really great work on helping our clients build confidence as they are looking at the investing world today. And I would say I'm squarely in team branding, always have been, because I just really think great storytelling and the emotional connections that brands make with their clients just provides a lift to every aspect of the funnel. So again, thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks. Portia?
Hi, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Portia Mount. I'm VP of Marketing at Trane Technologies, and I lead marketing for the commercial business, the Trane Commercial Americas business. We're the largest SBU in the enterprise, about a $6 billion business. And I think I am team both. I have been very much a demand marketer, especially moving into I'm a sort of career business to business marketer, and 5 years here in the manufacturing business, which is very much about demand. But I will say I am incredibly passionate about the power of brands to create connection and stickiness to everything that a company is about, including its purpose, its people. And so I am very much team both and looking forward to this, both the data and the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Great. And Paul, we could guess, but I think we should hear it from you yourself.
Yeah, I'd like you to guess. I'm Paul Stoddard, so I look after customer success at Salesforce, the CMO there. I'm with Portia. I'm team both. No question about it. It's kind of like, do you care about the short term or the long term? And it's yes. The answer is yes. Definitely care about both, and had to play in both disciplines to varying degrees. So I equally am looking forward to the conversation.
Terrific.
So this is great. Really glad to have, such a, expert group of folks with us on this journey. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk through some of the findings at a very real high level in terms of how we conducted the research and what we found. And then we'll go into a couple of the key topics and takeaways and insights that we had, and we'll break out for some quick questions. Along the way, if folks have questions that are joining us live right now, you can enter those into the Q&A and we'll queue up those questions. If we have time inside of the sections where we're covering that specific topic, or we'll cover them at the end when we circle back. So as I was saying, when we opened, we've been in this evolution from a profit as a company perspective, but we as marketers have been largely in several stages of transformation over the last couple of decades in terms of moving from a product-centered era of early advertising, mass advertising, and getting message out in broad-based media, to more integrated marketing and the ability to drive more segmented views of outbound media strategies, into a digital era of constant evolution of channel proliferation and ability to reach audiences and understand audiences in many new ways, given the data that was available, into what we would argue from a profit perspective is a growth engine era of marketing, where marketing is being asked to serve as a revenue guide and driver in terms of the organization, which means marketing is constantly evolving and changing the way that it manages itself and some of these brand and demand topics that we're going to talk about today, but also how it integrates into some of the other areas and functions of the organization that it probably never did before, sales and service and even back-end systems, to drive from a product-centered view to a customer-centered views of marketing interactions and more targeted outcomes for clients and customers. So we thought it was interesting to sort of look back at, some of the research that has happened in the space. You have the Benet Fields work that's become somewhat known in terms of the 60-40 split of, long-term investment and brand-related activities with a halo effect on short-term demand-driven, conversion-driven activities with a 40% split. And so we wanted to understand, is that really what's happening with marketers? Are they really doing this 60-40 split? Or are they finding other ways of bringing together sort of the long-term and short-term investments, to Paul's point? And are they finding different ways of blending these capabilities in a more modern way? So we kicked off this research. We started with some of the folks on this call and had interviews and one-on-one discussions and a broader set of CMOs that you can see listed on the left. And we were having this dialogue to understand what were some of the common themes or elements that we might want to test if we were going to ask a broader segment of marketing leaders across the world how they're making these linkages. So we were able to sort of isolate a couple of key questions that we wanted to ask. We rolled out that research across the US, UK, Germany, and China to get a good cross-section of global response. And we got responses across a whole host of different industries, serving many different areas, but with a key focus on core decision makers, primary decision makers within those organizations that were also applying that decision making against a larger, or at least in our view, a reasonable media spend allocation. So this isn't necessarily small businesses or mom and pop shops. This is big businesses making big bets and big investments, and that's what we were really trying to understand better. In aggregate, what we found is a couple of key trends. One, those that perform better from a marketing perspective or view themselves as having a higher performing marketing capability were tying more of their activities to business outcomes of the business that matter, as opposed to year-over-year measures of marketing performance. They were articulating business outcomes as part of their core marketing objectives. They were gradually transitioning from funnel-driven metrics and strategies, or certain stages of application of things like brand at the top of funnel and demand at the mid-funnel, to more journey-driven strategies and thinking of moments in time in customer interactions or potential customer interactions where they could affect some of that with brand and demand activities. They were also starting to drive visibility on a shared return on investment across brand and demand, as well as more holistically within their marketing efforts and marketing return on investment. They were experimenting more, and we'll talk a little bit about what we found there, but experimentation was a key driver for performance success. And then they were organizing themselves differently and actually stating that to be successful, one of the most important things they could do was focus on the organizational design of marketing as opposed to just pure marketing strategy. And that was a really interesting set of insights. So you can see we sort of covers a lot of ground, but in aggregate, it's sort of encapsulated this movement from fragmented planning and siloed brand and demand teams and budgeting and planning to more integrated planning across the marketing function, more integrated marketing planning with other functions like sales and service to drive towards business outcomes. So let's start with the first topic. One of the first key findings here is around that organizational design construct, organization mattering a bit more than even core strategy, and the focus on this in terms of thinking about what are common brand capabilities and what are common demand capabilities, and a growing number of shared capabilities that blend across their brand and demand organizations within marketing organizations. So thinking of things like planning processes, which can be in common, data strategy, customer data and strategy, content marketing strategies, media optimization strategies, even events or creative services, that can all be feeding both the brand related activities and demand related activities in the organization. So it raises this question, if it's so important, what can we learn? And we sort of have learned from our outside in research that marketing leaders are changing. We are all changing. Several of the panelists mentioned that they're both brand and demand. We think that's an evolution that's happening. We also think the teams are changing, the skills are changing. So I guess my first question, Portia, would be to you is, how do you think you have evolved, from as a leader in marketing in this context of merging both brand and demand or bringing that both elements into the workplace?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think I've evolved a few different ways. And I think one is really thinking about breaking down organizational silos and making sure that marketing does not live on an island. And so the collaboration with my partners in finance, my partners in product management, my partners in sales, and even IT has become even more important. I think in the earlier days, they were sort of like, what are you doing at our door? Like, why are we talking to you? But I have found that those top to top, middle to middle, even frontline to frontline relationships have been incredibly important for driving the efficacy of our function. And that's made me in turn think differently about the kinds of marketers we need now in order to perform, to drive the business. So I think that's one of the biggest things that is, I think that has helped me evolve as a marketing leader and as a business leader.
Are there some other thoughts for the panel, just in terms of leadership and the changing or evolution of how brand and demand are impacting leadership for marketing and or the teams themselves or how we're organizing our marketing organization?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think for me, I think we're gonna get into some of this in our conversation today. I couldn't agree more with Portia that the whole notion of marketing being an island is death, right? Like, we have to be at the center of everything that's going on. And you think about the complexity of the CMO role today and the complexity of marketing organizations today, you're absolutely at the center of everything that's going on. And so it's the same when you think about measuring brand and you think about measuring demand. The two are inextricably linked. And I think it's all about storytelling and being able to connect the dots. This slide that you have here, there's a lot there. How do you navigate that and tell a story about the effect that it's having on return on investment for the organization today? The only way that you can do that is through partnership with the teams that we've talked about already.
Paul, you have any secret sauce, any magic, any recent thoughts or discoveries in some of your most recent roles?
Oh, I'm sure that there's something in there. I actually liked your prior slide, David. I got to be honest with you, something I spent a lot of time thinking about, and that's the evolution of marketing and the fact that we've gone from something that was, really reactive to something which is now like totally proactive. So To my fellow panelists, I completely agree. It's about being at the table. It's about recognizing that brand strategy follows business strategy, and marketing, everything else is like about delivering to it. And that's an evolution for sure. So the prior slide is the one that I probably spend most time thinking about, or this one and the one before, in fact, where you were talking about the evolution. Absolutely. And I think it's bringing that organization along on that journey, that marketing is the growth engine. That things like your success engine or your support engine can actually be your future demand engine. They're concepts which are foreign paradigms to a lot of people, but it's our responsibility to make real.
One thing that came up a lot was under capabilities was ownership. And a couple of years ago, we noticed from a lot of clients, and still a little bit too when we do marketing org design, is people are often competing for, well, who owns what? Who owns which channels? And that was tricky, right? Because more recently, what we also have seen is that a lot of channels can be brand channels and demand channels. And it's really how you use them. So it's not always clear where it owns in anything, almost anything on this list. It's hard to even have anything discrete. There might be kind of a shared RACI for this topic. Maybe this person's accountable for it, but this other group needs to influence or be able to use it. And you need governance in between brand and demand, or in between commercial and product and brand marketing. So we've seen even how we talk about ownership changed a little bit. I mean, it is convenient when you own something, own a capability, but even when you don't, you need to be able to influence it or be able to be a part of it. It's hard to be an island. So we've moved a lot of things to that right side.
Any thoughts about skills? That came up also, just in terms of new skills, new kinds of marketers being needed in this world of, bridging between brand and demand. Anything come to mind?
I think that I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I'm sure we all think about data and analytics, like that is a very hot skill. I think in the olden days, people thought of marketing as being very creative, which it is, but it is also incredibly strategic. It is metrics driven. And so having people who have the analytical skills and also the creative side, I think about it as like a center brain marketer, a marketer who is very analytical, but also I love what you said, Theresa, about telling a story. The reality is we don't want to be boring. There's a lot competing for our customers' attention. And so it's not enough to just be all about product features and benefits. And I work in manufacturing where that is very much like that's the pull to do that, but it's speaking to humans and being able to understand the data, understand customer data, market data, the total available market available, and then to look at that data and translate it into a really compelling strategy and story that connects and ignites our customers. And so I'm really listening and looking, and also realizing though that we always have to keep upskilling too. So, if you went to business school 10 or 12 years ago, which I did, a lot of what you learned is probably obsolete. So we also have to continue to keep everybody's skills fresh, not just our teams.
I would completely agree. I think two things I would add is this notion of, there'll be more change in the next 5 than the last 100 in marketing. And there has been, right? We're in the middle of this digital revolution, the Internet of Things, using data, et cetera. And so you're 100% right. The capabilities of marketers today are extremely different than they were when you graduated business school and went to work for, a CPG firm. And so, continuous learning, I think, is really important. And we invest a lot of time and energy over my career in upskilling our team and making sure that they understand modern marketing. I think, the second thing is just how you're organized in doing that, so that, using agile tools so that you're constantly learning. And it's not about the smartest person in the room. It's about iterative marketing and making sure that you're in an environment where you can test and learn. I tell everybody that, if you're going to be on my team, you're going to get your pilot's license. And there are no sort of quick answers. So I think we have to test and learn a lot of different ways, using AI, using the MarTech stack today to be able to, be modern marketers.
I love both of those things. And I'd add, I think there was always a need for people to be depth marketers in certain areas, and this is my speciality. I'm seeing more of a need for breadth marketers, the full stack marketers, people that can actually join the dots between brand and demand and other areas as well, and actually be true business leaders at the same time. So I'm looking for breadth and depth as capabilities, and of course that goes to Portia's point. You've got to be a data scientist, and then equally so you got to keep that growing cycle. So agree to all the points, and breadth and depth are important.
So I'm going to flip it to Matt for our next topic.
Yeah, so this is a little bit provocative, and in the report, what comes before this is kind of the classic marketing funnel, where the very, very top, we kind of highlighted as conventionally, brand marketing's job is to fill the top of the funnel, and in the middle of the funnel really is conversion, and demand drives the middle, and that's a conventional thing. I'm sure we all grew up working like that. I still work like that most of the time. It's easy, or you could do Joe Jaffe's flip the funnel and do the other way around, but you're still using the funnel. What we found through the conversations was really, really interesting, is that there's certain limitations in only using that as part of especially your planning process, or how you plan, or how you go to market. And the limitations were, first of all, you're splitting up brand and demand, right? So you're basically separating them. And when you start to play with channels and stuff, it doesn't really work. It's hard to hold together. So, and they're not really working together as friends. They have different measurement languages. They're very different. And the big thing is that that's not really organized around the customer. And in a world where we're all trying to be more customer centric, where almost every industry, almost every client of ours is trying to pivot to be more customer centric, and from their point of view, they need more cohesive experience. They need more unified messaging. They need a more unified data strategy. You need to be treated right as one person. Then it doesn't really work. So the provocation here is, what if we started to use as the canvas for planning, instead of just the classic funnel, which is convenient for making certain choices and next best action for sure, is what if we use the customer journey? And what if we actually use the journey as the background? Because if you do that, and what you can see on the screen, it sort of starts top left with your explore and discovery, and then consideration, and then decision, and then on post-purchase, onboarding, loyalty, and advocacy, and going around again. What you start to realize, or at least we did, was each moment in time is a brand and demand opportunity. During discovery, sure, brand is more important, it's bigger, right? But with search, how can you ignore the fact that SEO and demand is happening right there for people in the moment? And that is part of discovery. So what gets tricky is that there might be a brand or demand-led moment in time, but they're both there. They're both present. And how do you start to plan both as friends along the journey? Now, the tricky side to this is, not only is that hard, you need a journey in order to work against it, but we found one of the challenges for people was a lot of the items, a lot of the areas of the journey are outside marketing's remit. So the convenience of the funnel is most of what you're doing, you get to control, but you need friends. So in order to do this approach, you really need to either be able to influence or have a friend in customer experience, or in servicing, or in onboarding, or in sales. There's other areas of the business which you need to bring into planning in order to truly pull this off. So I guess we wanted to tee that up. And I guess, Theresa, I'd love to start with you about how do you approach planning, and does this resonate, or is this even doable? What do you think? What's your perspective and experience with planning?
Yeah, for sure. I think the funnel has completely changed, right? And I love the fact that you've kind of flipped it on its side, because we're in the middle of this digital revolution. And, my background is largely in B2C. I'm doing a combination of B2B, B2C, and B2B2C now, but my history is mostly in B2C. And we spend a lot of time thinking about that integration of the physical and the digital, and using data, and we could track our customers and our clients all throughout the journey and nurture them through it by understanding where they are in that funnel, creating a surround sound so that you could nurture through it. I'm loving what I'm doing now, because you can really apply those same lessons to a different side to the business where you're nurturing leads. And I love what Portia said, that at the end of the day, whether you're an institutional client, an intermediary client, you're still a human. And there's so much coming at you that the notion of being able to use thought leadership and some of the other things that were on your list earlier to nurture through. I don't think it's brand over here and product over here and thought leadership over here and sponsorships over here and ESG over here. This surround sound approach of what marketing can bring to the table. The main thing though for me is measurement. If you took each of these pieces, and I know you're probably going to talk about this later, how are you measuring that? And how do you know where your client or your customer is in the journey and what you're doing to move them to the next phase of the journey, the role that marketing is playing in partnership with your business to move that lead along, especially in long lead cycle businesses like I'm in now. And so I think this whole notion of what you're suggesting here is right on. And the good news is we're in this revolution now. I remember when I first started in marketing, I presented to the board and my MarTech stack was like 2 vendors, right? 2 partners. Now I think I have 500 partners who are working with me to help deliver, these customer journeys to our clients and thinking through our, the role that marketing technology can play in both measuring and nurturing leads through that funnel.
Paul, from a Salesforce point of view, I mean, do you already work with the journey as a canvas, or would it be a newer thing? And how do you see it?
Yeah, yes is the answer, but to varying degrees. We're multi-product, right? So I mean, Salesforce, ever increasing product set and getting more and more complex. So just as Theresa was going through that and saying, and I agree, the funnel has completely reshaped itself, and everything's flipped on its head. I think it gets even more complicated the more you think about your relationship with your customer and having multiple different cycles going on at different times. So sometimes you're pulling on your brand relationship, sometimes it's on the, driving the, the exploring new products and opportunities. And, in other areas, you're really thinking about, okay, how am I driving loyalty and how are they advocating on our behalf? Which just gets more and more complicated the more complicated your portfolio is. So, yeah, it's a pretty complex sphere for sure. But I agree. I just like the fact that you turn this on its head, and as you start layering on the complexity, I think the bringing together a brand and demand only becomes more true.
Portia, anything on this? Does this resonate for you?
It does, and I would say we've probably been more traditionally focused on the funnel. But what I find really compelling about this is it really does put the customer at the center. And the reality is, depending on, and I think Theresa said this very nicely, but depending on where your customer is, you may have to flex between these two, brand and demand. And that's why I think, going back to the early part of our conversation, talking about the kinds of marketers that we need now, you've got to have people who can hold both things in their head at the same time. And I think, of course, we have brand managers and we have people who are solutions marketers, but the reality is everyone needs to think like a brand marketer and everyone needs to think like a solutions marketer, because it's all about where is your customer in that journey. And then I think the final thing is as we move into adjacencies away from maybe our core product, where core service, where maybe customers don't know us, again, you have to be able to flex, because maybe you're trying to appeal to a completely new vertical or new market or new customer type. And so that requires that the teams be flexible to think about what is the best lever to pull in order to engage that customer where that customer is, not based on what we want to sell them. So right. I think very
that's a big
compelling,
pivot, right.
Very compelling here.
That's a big change in behavior and perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just to segue from this conversation, one of the examples that we liked in this context was Shein, sort of the fast fashion retailers using influencer marketing as their primary brand introduction into the US market, into TikTok channels and their digital channels, where it's a blend of brand influencer marketing to conversion. Right. If I can do an unboxing, if I can introduce you to my brand and my products through an influencer who's highly valuable to you as an audience, and then get you to convert all in one marketing tactic. We love that as an example of what we could be doing, what is truly innovative in marketing if you really start to think of these as a linked capability. And so that leads to this discussion around experimentation. And Theresa, you mentioned it before, right? And having pilots licenses. I love that. The idea that, we as marketers need to become skilled and adept at test and learn and learning agendas, and thinking through what could we test? What is the hypothesis of what we think could happen? How do we own the argument in the C-suite to justify the expenditures of something that isn't proven yet? And how do we give ourselves the grace to have that as a constant in our yearly budgeting cycle? These were the challenges that sort of came out in our discussions with you as CMOs, in a broader sense. And it really proved itself out in terms of the research. And what marketers were telling us when they're successful, it's because they drive an experimentation as a core capability, and it's part of their methodology for decision making and investment and marketing allocation. And that in sort of contrast to those that weren't meeting meeting their goals, more targeting industry best practice or benchmarks, or sort of looking back at historical performance. So if we're beholden to our past and we're only measuring ourselves against our ability to outperform what we had done already, that's much less a key to success than actually thinking about things that we haven't done and how to test in new spaces and capture more share. So we've sort of viewed this in the context of what you see in the middle in terms of some of the elements that really help companies think this through in terms of spend allocation and channel mix, the ability to target and track the effectiveness of those kinds of experimentations, the thinking of brand position and creative as part of that discussion, and then how do you incentivize against the what's working and what's not working. So just by way of introduction to this topic, I mean, I wonder, Paul, if you could give us a thought around how you've seen success in terms of driving experimentation, or where you've seen it challenged from a CMO perspective.
Sure. So I don't know if it's going to be a popular thesis, but I think the reality is if you're not reinventing yourself, someone's reinventing for you. And certainly as marketeers, I think we face the paradigm that everyone thinks they're a marketeer. So again, if you're not kind of like breaking paradigms, then again, you're going to be told what to do. So you better get on the program. And I love Marissa's comment on, you've got it on screen on the right-hand side, which is around the fact, 80% should be something that you feel really confident in is going to deliver return, but 20% of what you're thinking about, you can take some risk there. And I kind of break it into a few different aspects. I think, first of all, you've got to be clear on what it is you want to experiment on. It shouldn't just be experimentation for the sake of experimentation. There's got to be business needs or something you're really trying to drive. So get really clear on what it is you need to experiment and try to evolve. What are you trying to break? You can only break something if you understand something. So to that understanding point, I think you've got to be able to have data and measure correctly. If you can't get the right data and you can't measure, then don't experiment. You're not experimenting on the right thing. So they would be, two kind of like underlying premises, if you like. But the third is, try and fail, but don't fail to try. So I think there's too many people that protect what they're doing versus actually really kind of go, hey, how can we look at this, do this a little bit differently? And then I'd say I'd break that last part into three parts as well. David, you know me well, I break things into three parts fairly often. But the first is I think you should come with a strong point of view, but lightly held. So, you shouldn't be trying to experiment to prove that you were right. You should be coming to an experiment and trying to find where it can take you. But, you got to start somewhere at the end of the day. I think the second thing is having beginner's mindset. Which is always a hard thing to do. So how do you remove the biases? And I think that often means who do you bring along with the journey with you so they can challenge your thinking. If you're just looking for social harmony, you're not really experimenting. So you want to bring people in that will challenge it along the way. And then I think there's an element of events and simplify. So there's often the experimentation can be on things that you think are working well. It's like, actually, can you improve them and do them better? And I think for me, there've been two things to consider. All of those things, all of that experimentation can be driven from within, but quite often it helps to also have it driven from the outside as well. So whether that be working with, the likes of yourselves or a think tank or bringing in outside perspective, another way to think about it, and it's been very successful for me in different organizations, is working with cohorts at different universities, for instance, and working on capstone projects. So laying out the problem and the thesis, the hypothesis, and giving the data, but letting some outside in thinking, that definitely brings the beginner's mindset. So lots of things around experimentation there. I'm sure, Portia and Theresa have great insight too.
Would Theresa or Portia like to break all of Paul's points into 3 different things and talk about
You go first, Portia.
Well, I think so. First of all, I love sort of Paul's unpacking of this slide. I don't think I can break down every single point, but to say I'll raise my praise hands and then I'll add to it. I think there's a couple of other, and I also love what Theresa said about the pilot. I'm in a very, again, I work with engineers, they're super financially metric oriented. And so we have to come to the table with a really compelling business case. And so maybe the add-on to this is, even it's a step before, is I think one of the ways you get the permission, in addition to everything that Paul just said, that you get the permission to experiment, is making sure that, one, you understand the risk tolerance of the executives that you're working with or your colleagues, because I'm in a business where because we manufacture things that if they don't work, then it is dire for the business. So understanding the risk tolerance of your audience and being able to calibrate so that you can give them the information that they need if that's required. I think the other piece is, and we talked about it a couple of slides ago, which is that seat at the table where you've built the credibility as the leader and or your teams who are meeting with their business partners. That is really, really important, because it gives you the forum and a little bit of runway to try new things that maybe, especially again, if you're in a business that's a low risk tolerance. I am a huge believer in, I tell my team all the time, like we do, no one lives or dies because of things that don't work or that it's like, so some of it is like, let's put it in perspective. We're not trying to operate on somebody's heart. We're not trying to find a, important gene marker for something. We are marketers. And so no one lives or dies. And so giving a team permission to try and fail in that pilot, and then to be able to do the debrief afterwards to say, what did we do? Okay, so this was a campaign that we ran for 3 months for a new product. What did we learn? What worked? What didn't work? And be super open about and transparent about that. And even in our operating reviews, where it's our whole business review, where all the businesses report out on the prior month, I will often say, we had this hypothesis and this is what we did. And this is what and it didn't work out the way we thought, but here's what we learned. And that builds huge trusted credibility. And so I really feel that it's the combination of those things, of challenging your team to pilot, but also making sure that you've built the relationships and the connections with your key functional business partners so that they understand what it is that you are doing. Again, moving away from marketing being on an island on its own to really integrating to drive the business and having that buy-in so that there is support for when you're successful, but also understanding when you're doing things that are new, that are pushing the edge. And I think that's really what helps to drive results in my experience.
Right. I think it was excellent. I think maybe we can move to the next topic, Matt.
Yeah. So Theresa teed this up earlier about the idea of measurement and how really these two topics are tricky for measurement, because when we have people talking about it, some will talk about brand as more long-term, it's on a different trajectory, has different ways of knowing if it's working or not working. Demand is often shorter term, it's measured shorter term, it's more accountable, or it's easier to see attribution sometimes, I guess. The connective thread between brand and demand is a little tricky sometimes. The ball can get dropped. So you've got like a lot of issues: competing language, attribution, not a different language. It's really kind of dicey. So what we found on the left, we asked what matters to people, like what kind of objectives do they think really matters that are linked to business success. And all the ones that, on the screen, especially the top 4, and then there were some more below that, stood out as really people were articulating objectives that have clearer connections to business outcomes versus ones you don't see on the screen, like customer satisfaction, which we all know is incredibly important, and we need to do, but it's harder to link that right to business outcomes. So we found people were declaring certain objectives above others. So that was interesting. Then on the right, what you see is the idea that you need some, and this is just one example, you need some kind of system, we articulate in the report, to kind of pull it all together. With the very, very top, you've got somebody to win with, right? A customer or a customer segment. And then you've got some kind of business objective that you can articulate that both brand and demand people can share, that this is a shared fight. We're all going after brand desirability. Beneath that can be more distinct awareness. Are we known? Are we relevant or distinct, right? Are we in the right channels? Are people, you can build out from there too, but you really build a shared agenda and a shared language. And then you can find different KPIs that can proxy for them or be them if it's a little bit easier. But without this, you can't really come back to the room together. Like, we made a joke that nobody wants to hear about clicks, right, in the boardroom. And nobody does. Like, so when you go back to the CEO and you say, look, this investment paid off, you want to be able to speak in business outcomes and be able to connect all those efforts, not say, oh, that was somebody else's problem. So we found the unification and the integration for it too. Now, it's very easy to do on a slide, right? We can all try to create a brand and demand dashboard. I don't know if anybody actually on this call has done it too. We've tried to do it for some people, and it can work, but it's very disparate data feeds. It's very different languages. It's very hard to speak long-term, short-term, but we think it's that important. We think it's that important to bring it together and to be able to talk to business outcomes, and the research pretty much, validated that too. So I guess I'd be curious from any of you who want to jump in first is how, assuming it's true, how hard or easy, or have you pulled this off? And what do you think? Like, what do you think the first steps to being able to do it is? We're pretty aware of a lot of the challenges.
So Matt, we're hoping at T.Rowe that you're going to figure that out for us.
No, I'm saying that
because we're paying you to do that. So that's going to be awesome when you give me the answers. But in my past life, we were able to get closer, right? I think there's just much more of a direct connection to be able to sort of say, in year, what you were able to get from, if you take $1 million, what can you get in terms of in-year revenue? I'm finding it a bit more challenging with the different audiences today, and longer lead times. But it can be done. I mean, the real question for me is I think you talked about disparate sources of data. Even if you just started there and saying, we're going to measure this one way, and we're going to be consistent in it, that kind of helps, right? So this is everything though, right? As a marketer, if we can't get this right, if we can't have a commercial outcome, which I love the language you're using, which is stop talking about clicks, et cetera, and talk in language of commercial outcomes, we're never going to continue to advance as a function. So I couldn't agree more that this is a real priority.
Paul or Portia?
Well, again, I'm not sure it's going to be a popular view. I think we're overcomplicating it. I really do. I feel like as marketers, we've been beholden too long for people telling us that there's a million ways to different measure things, and there's so many different business objectives we have to hit. And I'm just not sure there's really that many. I think businesses get measured in pretty simple ways and pretty consistent ways. And as marketers, I bet if we all sat around, over, a glass of whatever we choose, we would come to some pretty consistent metrics that we are all being held accountable to. And yet somehow we are a product of, we let ourselves get dissected in a million different ways. And I don't know what the answer is. Maybe it is David and Profit actually declaring, look, this is the dashboard we all need to dock to as a 95% truism, and we all get behind it. In some ways, it was the joy of funnel management. It was like it was a pretty tested thing that we could all dock to and go, hey, we know how it works and we can measure against each other. Brand's been harder over the years. I think we're at a place now where you can get to a point of understanding what perceived brand value is and how to measure it. I would love us to rally as a community and figure out what is the way to truly measure, and more like the 5 or 6 key metrics, because I hear this come up time and time and time again, I never hear a great answer, probably not from me either. But everyone just says, hey, there's 100 different ways to measure this. So I'm going to go with Theresa. I want to see what David produces for T.Rowe, and I want to copy it completely. But we have some pretty sophisticated reporting at Salesforce. I can't complain. We have what we call a heart of marketing, but maybe we can compare notes.
Yeah, I too am anxiously awaiting the results that Profit will deliver for Theresa. And so we will have to do a follow-up. I will just, and I actually really like that provocation, Paul. I do think that sometimes we make things really complicated because we're trying to prove the value of what we do. And so we want to be able to come up with a fancy metric to show that like we're worthy of the investment. I will say, I think what makes this difficult is, and maybe if you're in consumer products, CPG, it's different, but at least on the B2B side, not every business or company puts consistent investment in brand. And so it's really hard. It's sort of feast or famine, like, oh, the good year, let's do the brand study. Oh, it's a bad year, we can't do the brand study. And so that part makes it really hard to get that data over some longitude, some period of time. So all the more reason I look to my brothers and sisters in B2C, because who tend to be more consistent in their investment in brand. Whereas I feel like on the B2B side, we just can be a bit spotty just based on what the investment looks like that particular year. So I do think this is a bit of a wicked problem still, but I also think it is solvable. And I love the idea of like, hey, let's come up with like 6, key metrics that we can all agree on. And as we move around, we take those metrics with us.
Yeah.
We're counting on you, Profit.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Portia, to your comment is I think for me anyway, I look at brand much less today about what I'm investing in sort of a brand campaign and more in that surround sound approach, right? And so whether it's thought leadership, ESG really matters today, your IR report, your annual report, there's so many things, as you well know, that speaks to your brand. And so I'm trying really hard to get at least our firm to sort of think differently around, even in lean times, capital B branding is much bigger than our advertising spend. And so how do we think about what that looks like more broadly?
I love that, Theresa, because I do think it really speaks to, and again, thinking about the industry that I'm in now, other industries I've been in have really understood exactly the way you describe brand. And I would say, depending on the industry you're in, it may be much narrower. And so there's education to be had to talk about. It's not just your advertising, but it is thought leadership and all the things that you laid out. So yes, I think that's absolutely spot on.
Great, that was fun. So for us in this first pass of this research, we kind of landed on these 4 recommendations, which you probably heard a sense of. One is, build that organization that has capabilities that work together regardless of where they sit. Maybe there's an updated way we can all plan our marketing, both in how we do it and then being more agile in doing it. Experimentation, we think is a top level agenda item. It's not a nice to have anymore. And then the measurement conversation we just had, how do we look for a shared view and maybe a narrower set of what good looks like in doing it too. I'd love to ask you all, and also people listening in, so they can write it in the Q&A, is we want to keep going with this, right? So we could go deeper into some of these topics. We didn't tackle everything. We could go vertically. We could, there's other areas of brand and demand integration and why it's a love story rather than a boxing match. There's other places we could take the conversation. Where would folks like us to take it next? Because we're game. When you read the report, what were you disappointed wasn't in it?
I can tease one on behalf of Portia, which is, I wish we had dug a little bit deeper into the variation between B2B and B2C. I think there's an opportunity to really understand some of the distinctness that happens in account-based marketing versus, direct marketing. I think a lot of the same themes would still come out, but I think they may manifest in different ways. So I look forward to us, digging a little bit deeper into those differences.
Well, maybe just one thought we are in this, I have not seen a talent market like this for marketing in a really long time. There is a huge opportunity but also, so keeping people upskilled. I continue to just think about talent, how do you find and keep your best talent? And I just think that that's going to continue. It's not a very sexy topic, but I think it's really important that for the sort of future of our function of continuing to think about what are the right kinds of skills and capabilities, and what are the ways that we as leaders can provide that, so that not everyone can, jump off track and go to school full time, but there's so many different opportunities for on-demand learning. And so I think a lot about just like our talent and how we're keeping them engaged and also upskilled. So I don't think that'll ever really go away. And that may be along with organizational design and what is good, how our orgs structuring to meet the need of a business, these evolving businesses.
Yeah, I think they're both great. And a build on this one might be when I think about brand and demand, I think of the relationship we have with our customers. Doesn't matter if it's B2C or B2B in my mind, it is a relationship with your customers or your customers' customers. So if the relationship is a feeling and experience, how do we start changing the paradigm on a pre-sale, sale, post-sale world? Because I think that's how a lot of businesses think about marketing, that you need to split into 3 distinct areas. And I don't think that's true anymore. I think it almost goes back to your infinity loop and the fact that you're constantly pulling on your brand as you're going through demand, and demand's actually pivotal to your perceived brand value as well. So I think there's maybe an extra layer of, I don't know if it's research or just how you present out on thinking about changing that paradigm of pre-sale, sale, post-sale into more of a what's the ongoing relationship.
Paul, that's a great point too, because a lot of people, this is not brand to demand, right? Which we all know brand has a great halo for demand, and that's true, and it's true. It's brand and demand, because demand also fuels, and we learn a lot. We learn a lot from our interactions with customers through demand marketing, that it can infuse and inform the product and the brand. So that would be great to go a little deeper there and make sure that that's coming across.
It's interesting, Paul, just a side note on that one. We have a colleague who's writing a book exactly on that topic, right? In terms of a lot of platformization, so thinking of, a lot of us aren't even selling direct to consumer, even when we are, we're creating platforms, or we're working in or marketing through third-party platforms that we don't even control, or, defining our experiences in sort of non-owned experiences. So it's a really interesting idea. So not just sort of the acquisition side of that, but like the in-use side of it, in terms of when I'm using the product or service and it's not my owned asset. How do you do that as a marketer is quite interesting. So we're starting to dig into that. So stay tuned. I'll make sure you get a signed copy.
I think, David, what you're talking about is exactly what I was talking about earlier, is that everything speaks to the brand, right? And you think about, if I'm going to ask Siri about investing as an example, what are they going to say about my firm? How are they going to say it? I don't really have control over that today. What does Wikipedia write? Do I have control over that today? What are the other platforms? VR, right? And AI, we're all using it, but the question is, do we really have control over all the ways that your brand is being represented? So I love that as an extension of what you're talking about, is platforms where everything's speaking to your brand, that notion, and going into other platforms. The other one for me would be brand experience. So again, well beyond spend how does that play as you think things through, right? I know you're focusing on bigger brands that have bigger budgets, but there are brands that have really broken through that don't have big budgets because their experience is so unique and they created these unique branded experiences. And so I just wonder, as we think through as different firms, the differentiation aspect of the role that experience plays. In my past life, connecting broadly customer experience data in all its forms to the brand and to demand was very, very rich space.
Hey, David, do you want to answer? One of our favorite people, Ivy Brown, asked a question.
Ivy Brown asked, building a marketing organization today takes time. How much time should one give itself? Well, I mean, that's infinity is probably the answer, right? I mean, I don't know what everyone on the panel has learned, but one thing I've learned is we're in a constant state of evolution, right? So it's not a finite period of time to define an organization or what marketing's vision is. It's a constantly evolving, continually improving state of organization for marketing. So getting comfortable with that is one of the wins, is that there isn't necessarily a defined time to be done, but a set terms of intervals to measure success and progress and celebrate success and move on from failure or things that didn't work. But getting into a cadence and a practice of constantly looking at it and evolving over time is actually the better practice, in my opinion. Any other thoughts on that, though?
I would add that it's also how the marketing organization works with itself and the rest of the organization, not just how we set up the boxes, and where things are. We find that's the hardest thing to change, but the most important.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the answer is it depends on what your organization is designed to do. A couple of things I think about is, one is engage. So again, we talked about collaboration. A really good HR business partner who's got solid design, organizational design skills will save you a ton of grief. Because Matt, your point around, like, it's not just about the boxes, it is about the people in the boxes. It's also about the processes. It's about the technology. It's people, process, and technology, and all of that is wrapped in your org. And it can be really easy to sort of fall in the, like, here's an open box, let me put a name in there. So a really good HR business partner, I find, is important. I think it's also important to let your organization settle a bit. Sometimes we get, especially as marketing leaders, we get really excited and we want to change this and change that and tweak this and tweak that. But again, there's people on the other end of that. So some of it is like letting your organizational settle a bit, making sure people understand their roles and responsibilities, what they're being measured on. And then when things don't work, you tweak, but very surgically, because again, in this talent market, people do not have to put up with being whipsawed by change. So I do think you have to be agile, but you also have to create stability for your team so that they feel confident in what they're being charged to do.
Yeah, nicely put. Well, everyone, thank you so much. If you've downloaded the report, what you should see at some point is we are going to release a little bit of a toolkit with kind of some worksheets and some ways of applying these recommendations and maybe how to try them on or try to play with them. So that should come if you've signed up for the report. And you'll hear from us again. We're going to take this feedback and kind of continue this conversation and the research. And by all means, reach out to us. And I'm sure our guests would love to hear from people as well about it. But thank you everyone for joining on the panel as well.
Thank you.
Having us.
Have a good day.
Cheers.
Thank you.